Welcome to Very Honored Frater BT's Esoteric Podcast, Episode 44. The second interview with Hart Williams about my father's old teacher, Andrew de Passano, a.k.a. Andrea de Passano. But first, I want to introduce a new segment called Coolest Jesuits I Have Known. We've already mentioned Athanasius Kircher on this program, who in 1652 drew the Tree of Life diagram based on an earlier 1625 version by Philippe de Aquin. So if you, like me, have ever shown the Tree of Life to a rabbi and had them raise an eyebrow, wondering why everything was placed that way, and why the mother letters weren't simply the 3 horizontal paths, and why the double letters weren't simply the 7 vertical paths, and the single letters weren't simply the 12 diagonal paths, the obvious choice. And if the rabbi has further raised an eyebrow and said, and why are all these pagan archetypes on here? What are the tarot cards doing on the paths? The paths are all mixed up and there's tarot and pagan. Get this stuff off of my table. Get it off. Then you are already familiar with the Tree of Life of Athanasius Kircher. But we're not here to talk about Athanasius Kircher today. Today I want to talk to you about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Is that how it's pronounced? It's. I know it's not Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. I'm trying for French. I'm part French somewhere back there. I took French, believe it or not, at one point. The impetus behind this is I've noticed that I have a new fan in Virginia who is apparently a creationist. So that's interesting. The Esoterinerd podcast is on the iTunes religion and spirituality category. So it's right next to a lot of preachers and fundies and, people condemning homosexuality and things like that. So that's sort of odd. I want to see if there's maybe another better category I can have it moved over into, and if I am able to do that. But anyhow, I wanted to read you an excerpt from an article which appeared in Creation Spirituality magazine, the summer 1994 issue, by John R. Mabry, a doctoral student at the time at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Progressive Catholics have long cherished Teilhard de Chardin and his unique and mystical vision. And for those of us who have only recently discovered the new cosmology, his discovery is as great an epiphany as the encountering of Hildegard, Julian of Norwich, or any of the other mystics who testify to divine immanence. Teilhard was a man possessed of a rare vision, who was capable of re-mythologizing his faith to fit the facts that his scientific studies convinced him of. His was not a god out there who disapproved of humans hypothesizing about or even tampering with the creation. His god was an organic entity who lived and breathed the life and breath of the creation, a creator who was simultaneously giving birth to and being born from the magnificent organism of the universe. His views are profoundly creation-centered and are worthy of our present consideration not only because his thought was ahead of his time, but because his predictions, which seem so unlikely in his own time, are coming to pass unnoticed beneath our very noses. Chardin was not a psychologist, nor even a philosopher in the usual sense. He was a priest and mystic, but he was also a scientist, to whom the concept of evolution held as much weight as Scripture. Evolution is the basis for Chardin's entire cosmology, Not, as the Darwinian evolution would have it, a random product or the survival of the fittest, but an evolution planned and guided by divine agency. As Teilhard de Chardin himself writes, quote, "The magic word, evolution, which haunted my thoughts like a tune, was to me like unsatisfied hunger, like a promise held out to me, like a summons to be answered." End quote. Chardin's universe is one of continuous and interwoven evolutionary threads, incorporating plants, animals, the planet, the cosmos, and, most particular to him, not merely the physical and mental evolution of humankind, but our spiritual ascent as well. Michael Murray, in The Thought of Teilhard de Chardin, writes, "In Teilhard's hands, the theory of evolution, far from diminishing man by relating him to the apes, as so many churchmen used to fear," BT's parenthesis, and some still do, end parenthesis, actually reestablishes him at the moving apex of time-space, well above the fixed central position which he lost in the Copernican revolution. End quote. In Teilhard's estimation, humankind is the crowning achievement of the universe, because it is in us, and as far as we yet know, only in us, that the creation has become self-aware. Our eyes are the eyes through which the earth finally beholds her own beauty, and, just as importantly, knows that she beholds it. Human beings are not above the creation, but are themselves the creation, that part of the creation that is self-conscious. We have reached the end of the expanding, or diversity stage, and are now entering into the contracting, or unifying stage. At this point, Chardin's theory runs completely counter to Darwin's, in that the success of humanity's evolution in the second stage will not be determined by survival of the fittest, but by our own capacity to converge and unify. The most important initial evolutionary leap of the convergence stage is the formation of what Chardin termed the Noosphere. Its formation, as Michael Murray puts it, begins with a global network of trade, communications, accumulation, and exchange of knowledge, cooperative research, all go into the weaving of the material support for a sphere of collective thought. In the field of science alone, no individual knows more than a tiny fraction of the sum of scientific knowledge, and each scientist is dependent not only for his education, but for all his subsequent work on the traditions and resources which are the collective possession of an entire international society composed of the living and the dead, just as Earth once covered itself with a film of interdependent living organisms, which we call the biosphere, so mankind's combined achievements are forming a global network of collective mind. For more about Teilhard de Chardin, visit your local library. I'm just fucking with you. You can Google him. TeilhardDechardin. Our guest tonight, some of you might recall, was probably Andrew de Passano's longest running student. He went through the course several times and would eventually lead the meditations. And so, without further ado, let's get to that interview, shall we?
Hello.
Greetings. Welcome to the Esoterinerd podcast.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome back.
Are we hearing everything fine?
Yeah, everything sounds crisp.
Good. Good. I had a headphone. I had a headset and could not for the life of me find it. So I took that as a sign from the cosmos to go get a good one.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds real good. Cool. So where did we leave off last time?
I'm not sure,
Oh, I don't know.
but well, I kind of brushed up on the intro that Andrew used to give to the classes, which I think
Oh, cool.
um, might be vaguely viable.
Yeah. Do you want to just lead us in that intro?
All right, but let me start out by saying something that I don't know if you knew this, but
Okay.
um, this was a completely non-denominational in every possible way path. We had we had the head of the Los Angeles Skeptics Society on the board of directors, and we had alchemists, sannyasins, Christian mystics, you name it. Used to be you couldn't go to the Bodhi tree, pre Shirley MacLaine, and not find a TES person at the counter.
Hmm.
We seem to, um, but it's because of the fact that this is not a, it's not a religious practice. You don't have to give up anything to do it.
Yeah.
Um, it goes with whatever your practice is. If you believe in gods, then that's fine, and if you don't believe in any gods, that's fine too.
Yeah. Yeah, you can approach it as psychological hypnosis. It's like breath work. You can look at it from a purely rational scientific standpoint of what's going on with the brain, or you can look at it from a spiritual standpoint, or you can mix the two. Find kind of your own relationship with the meaning of spirit.
Well, I think you touched on it a little earlier, which is Andrew used to point out that um, there are two kinds of yogins. There's the jhana yogin and the bhakti yogin. And
Hmm.
there is neither path is considered superior or inferior, but it's a matter of temperament. Bhakti yoga is devotional. It seeks to transcend by leaving the mind behind. Um, and there are many bhakti schools. But for those of us who aren't bhakti, um, there are not a lot of schools for the jhana yoga. And jhana means this. One is the bhakti is the path of devotion, jhana is the path of wisdom. And it's very, very much in keeping with our Western concept of science and intellect. It's the mind is not left behind.
Right.
Uh, Except when you get to a point where you jump into a para-rational whatever state, it's explained to the mind in such a way the mind understands it and can accept the fact that I can't come along for the ride.
Sort of like dreams.
Well, the thing about it is the great problem in metaphysics is the whole problem of what Andrew used to call rational feedbacks, which is the mind is trying to protect you. It's trying to keep you from taking a safety pin, putting a towel around your neck, and jumping off the roof.
Right.
And it does that from morning to night. It never stops until your head hits the pillow. So when you say, "Oh, I've had this out of the body experience," the mind says, "Oh, yes, 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 right," and picks it apart because that's its job. I mean, to analyze literally means to break apart, to break into smaller and smaller pieces.
I always think of dissecting a frog.
Yes, yes. Well, the mind will take and dissect until there's literally nothing left.
It's unfortunate for the frog, though.
Well, it,
Sometimes.
it depends on what kind of life the prog was leading before he got caught.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are worse things than dying in some kind of frog lives. It's true. Could be a prog with particularly bad karma.
Yeah.
We have to take these things on a case by case, on a frog by frog
Right.
basis.
Right. Yeah. You can't stereotype.
Um, but Andrew used to say the jhana yogin dissolves the world. Is what you're doing is we are taking the world apart and seeing what makes it tick. And Buddha himself said Buddhism is nothing but it's a series of techniques, series of practices, and it starts with the question, how can I be happy? That was what Buddha came back from the Bodhi tree with. Um, you know, he didn't speak for several days, and I've always appreciated that, because when he finally did speak, they said, "Why didn't you speak?" He said, "Because to speak would be to lie."
Hmm.
Well, because language depends upon duality, and the whole unity can never be expressed through duality.
Yeah.
So, which helps us all in the sense of we're always worrying about telling the truth. You're always lying. The question is, how much truth can the person you're speaking to bear?
Hmm.
As in, you wouldn't sit and give very explicit sexual education to a 5-year-old.
Right.
It would be it's not appropriate,
Or
and that was
probably legal. Yeah.
well, exactly. But the point is, there are lots of different situations in which you can tell the person according to the truth they can bear. But the question of, am I lying? Of course you're lying. You'll always be lying. Don't ever fall into the trap of thinking you can speak perfect truth and you're fine.
Hmm.
Do the best you can.
Yeah.
This is, this is a tantric school. It's a school which is based on the notion of, first I understand what my problem is before I try to fix it. Um, And one of the great ironies is, as you begin to observe yourself, many of the things you thought were your great vices are actually your great virtues. And many of the things that are you think are your great virtues aren't virtues at all.
That's true.
But, it's like the fuzzy pink cloud. The only part of yourself that you ever regularly see is the fuzzy pink cloud, which is that thing between your eyes, which you tune out.
Yeah.
That's why none of us can stand to see ourselves on TV. On film, on video. I was really surprised this year at how many actors, when they're being reviewed, when they're being interviewed, would say, "No, I never watch anything any of this. I can't handle it."
Yeah.
And these are people who are nominated for Oscars. So it's perfectly normal. If you get it used to be, if you got a tape recorder and you put the little tape recorder thing out and put it on play, and then you'd roll it back and play it back, everybody in the room hearing themselves would go into paroxysms of embarrassment. Oh my God, I don't sound like that. Of course you do, but you don't see yourself. Well, this is about learning to see yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Speaking of
yes, it's the mantra of clarity.
Did you could I talk you into leading us through that introduction that you would lead before?
Well, I'm kind of doing it,
Oh, I understand.
but that's the whole point. Andrew wanted you to understand, and I'm sure his teacher and his teacher's teacher, that what this is it's a way of. I mean, Andrew used to say, "Well, what I give you ultimately, I give you sort of a spiritual Swiss Army knife. I give you the techniques and I show you how it works, and then after that, it's up to you to use the various tools on the knife according to what your life is." We meditate, but we're very, the Tibetans were very technocratic people. They did not have the luxury of being able to wander around and eat fruit while wearing a loincloth. Well, many of the great Hindu schools, you could do that. You could literally kind of live off fruit and live and walk around the forest in a loincloth and meditate and, meditate for days if you want. Tibet, it's cold. So you don't have to meditate for more than 5 minutes a day. And it's a very effective meditation technique. They stone the body, freeze the emotions, still the mind, and now we go to work. Instead of, if you want to do transcendental meditation or certain kinds of mindfulness, you can spend years just trying to shut the mind up. Well, Tibetans didn't have time to do that. So it's very there are techniques and you do different things. And the mind comes along with you. We break the world down to what we know, and we start from there. Instead of beginning with all the assumptions, Andrew used to call it, we swallow frogs. They feed us frogs when we're too young, and we have all these frogs, and we can't figure out what to do. So we just go back and start at point zero, which is I have a mind, I have a set of emotions, and I have a body. We know that. There's no argument that that's what we have. Whether we have astral bodies or etheric dimensions and all of that, we'll find out later. But we know we have a mind, a set of emotions, and a body. And it's very scientific. First thing that we learn how to still the body. And then we learn how to freeze or calm the emotions, depending. Sometimes you do astral meditations, and so you want the emotions calm, but not frozen. And then we still the mind. And now we can do some work. And we work on different things. I mean, that's the Swiss Army knife. It's a progressive work, which is, it would be once the class got going for about 3 weeks, it would be closed. And no new students could come in. They'd have to wait to the next class because it, proceeds from point A to point Z. And each, you start with your foundation and you build your cognition. And I remember when I first went, I went totally by accident. And at the time I was thinking I was going to be a science fiction writer. And I went to see what was going on. It was actually not that far. I could literally walk from my apartment to where it was. And when I first heard this stuff, I thought, oh, well, that's such science fiction. It's just science fiction, astral travel and all of this stuff. Well, turned out it wasn't. And the world changed. And you realize that what the Tibetans did was they approached psychology the way that we have approached physics. And you get results. I mean, Andrew used to say, if it doesn't produce results for you at every step along the way, if it's not its own justification, then we're all wasting our time. Because this is not about belief. It doesn't matter what you believe. Believe anything you want. This is about evidence. If you've had the experience of what lucid dreaming or astral travel, whichever you want to call it, if you've had the experience of that autonomy in the dream state, then no one can argue you out of it.
Right.
But if you have not, all of the discussion in the world will not get you there. This is, gnosis, direct knowledge, experience. Once you've experienced it, it's real, then it's yours. And your mind can actually use it in its, planning and the way that it looks at the world. It becomes a legitimate thing and not just another weird story for Fate magazine.
Yeah.
Because if we don't understand, Andrew used to always say, without understanding, your leap of consciousness will be lost. Almost everyone you'll ever talk to has had a profound metaphysical, religious, alternate, whatever you want to call it, experience. Some very profound experience of what's something on the other side of the veil. And they mostly don't know what to do with it. But they'll tell the story, late at night, maybe in the hunting lodge, after the kids have gone to bed or whatever. They'll have had this experience, but it will not have helped them in any way because they don't understand what to do with it.
Right.
As we want to talk about telepathy, we want to talk about lucid dreaming, we want about being able to contact loved ones who have departed or loved ones who are on the other side of the world. If we have experienced that and we know the tech and we have and as a repeatable event, then it's a reality. It's part of our world, and we take it for granted in the same way that we take being able to see the weather satellite for granted, and yet both of them profoundly change the way that we see the world.
Right.
So I started out as a science fiction writer who was coming to see all these weird little, philosophy, whatever it is. And I ended up last summer going to the World Science Fiction Convention as a person who's practiced this particular path for more than 30 years.
Hmm.
And I found that I just couldn't think like them. It was like
Hmm.
most of the CDs that they saw sort of in cartoon form in the books were things that were actual possibilities of experience. This is a profoundly magical and amazing world. And instead of running away from it in books, the closer we look at it, the more incredible it becomes. Um, and Andrew used to always say something that I really enjoyed, which was that drew me to me instantly. He said, we ask for a donation to keep the temple going, but no serious, sincere seeker will ever be turned away. Which was, well, it was the rule, and the board of directors used to fight about it every year at the board of directors meeting.
Yeah, you got to turn some people away. Yeah.
Well, no, not that. It was just finances. It's like
Right.
we got to charge for this, and
Yeah.
it's
Or
like,
don't let word get out that you let people,
Well, ironically, the Tibetans have no problem
you don't
themselves
put it
with
in the
this.
ad, it's $25 or free,
Right.
whatever you can afford. Yeah.
Well, we call it now sliding scale.
Right.
You see that all over. Well, I don't know where I'm in a college town, and you see sliding scale events all over the place.
Yeah, just give us your last year's tax report and we'll tell you how much the ride is going to be.
No, that's to adopt a stray cat.
Ah.
Seriously, my cat died a few years ago, and we wanted to get another cat, and we wanted to get a rescue rather than go to a. And we went out to the humane, and they gave us a 4-page thing, including them having the right at any time to hold a surprise inspection to see how you're treating the animal.
Hmm.
And it was like, okay, I don't think so.
Yeah, I get to pick up my cat at 3 p.m. She just had a mastectomy.
Ouch,
Yeah.
yes.
She had cancer, so it's good. It'll be good to have her back. I've been worried about her. I've been preoccupied with it. So
Well, they're important. They are
yeah,
very important in
familiars.
our lives.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's fascinating to reflect on. Like, what are they to us? What are we to them? What's with this relationship we have with with cats? And there's those comics that go around about how, on one hand, there's how we treat cows and chickens and pigs, and then on the other hand, there's how we treat cats and dogs. How different it is.
Well, dogs are creatures of our hunter gathering, our tribal past,
Right.
but cats are animals of civilization.
Hmm.
They first come to us when we have granaries, because the granaries attract of vermin, and the cats feed off the vermin.
Oh.
So cats are creatures have been with us since the beginning of civilization.
But dogs have been with us since the beginning
Since
of fire.
yeah, or before, we don't know.
Yeah, it maybe. Yeah. Wow.
It was one of those tricks that dog society and human society
That's why
have.
dogs are more like people. I mean,
Well,
cats are like people in when people are independent and rebellious, but dogs can fall in line. And they get
look
with the
at what
program.
happens with our animals, though. Over the course of their lives, they develop more human interests than they have dog or cat interests.
Right.
And it has been a kind of apprenticeship into the species. If reincarnation is real or souls are real or whatever,
Hmm.
the question is,
Yeah,
where
that's
are
a
all the
good
new
point.
ones coming from?
Yeah.
I mean, twins 1 in 17, and that works slowly, but um,
Hmm.
there's an awful lot of cats operating I mean, caterpillar tractors, and an awful lot of ex-dogs doing security guard work.
I have a feeling humans go back and forth sometimes, and be a cat in between.
Actually, um, we don't regress. We don't regress. And it has to do with hands. Once you've had hands, you'll never go back to not having hands.
Hmm.
And if you watch your dog or your cat, they're absolutely fascinated with your hands because, the hands can do these magical things that their paws cannot. And many dogs and cats, you'll notice, will learn how to flush a toilet or open a door or, do an almost human manipulation, undo a lock.
Hmm.
Um, but it has to do with, as they live with us, our interests become their interests. In the wild, you can find almost no dogs that have a taste for ice cream.
Hmm.
But on your block, you can probably find three. No, we have a very I mean, the thing that I thought that is the least talked about, and yet probably the most profound thing that has come to me in this work is the understanding we're part of the world. We're totally of this planet. We're not separate. We're not alien creatures against a hostile universe. We're literally part of the desire of the planet. Maybe the planet just wanted to touch the moon. Maybe that was all.
Hmm.
But we come from the desire of the planet, not we're not at war with it. We replace the earth, air, fire, and water in our bodies constantly. So much so that you kind of start, if you look at the process, you kind of wonder, well, what is your body if every 120 days everything has been swapped out? Where the heck did you go?
Yeah. And all this cosmic dust that we're made of was once flaming hydrogen. That was us. I mean, we could
Right.
say we were, that star.
Or that bottle or that Perrier that you're drinking was once peed by a dinosaur.
Yeah, when I'm teaching yoga, I always talk about you're breathing the blue sky.
Hmm. We are, one of the very first things that Andrew used to say was, one of the exercises was go out and say, look at things and go, Tat Vamasi, I am that. I am that. This whole world, I'm what I am it, as a drop is part of the ocean. And the whole trick is that the Tibetans came up with a very practical, step by step way of getting a grip on your life, basically. I was reading one of the pieces that was, he said, this is a way of getting the clarity to understand where you're at, and then the tools in order to understand how to now create the future that you want to create. Because
Right.
we know that there are very profound mysteries about ourselves. We can't understand how it is that we're a creature that can at the same time crave pizza and dieting. How we can, I want to, I've got to have a pizza. I've got to have a pizza. I have to lose weight. I have to lose weight at the same moment. How is this possible? We're filled with these contradictory urges and we don't know what to do with them. And at the same time, we don't, I have a real problem with modern psychology, always have, just because of the fact that there is no commonly accepted paradigm for consciousness.
Hmm.
I mean, if astronomy was that way, the last time astronomy was that way was during the days of the pre-Socratics. Heraclitus thought that they were bundles of swamp gas that lifted up and then caught fire, and other people thought they were fireflies, and other people thought they're holes in this big dome,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. Well, we have a kind of a commonly accepted view of the cosmos, which is much bigger than that, by the by.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people won't even look at what you're pointing at when you say consciousness. I mean, by that I mean people who are strictly atheistic, science-minded, reason-minded, and you say, well, how do you explain you? How do you explain me? And then they say, you're just playing with words. They won't even look at what you're saying.
Well, that's a very, very big problem, and it reminds me, Stanley Kubrick made A Clockwork Orange because he happened to pick up a copy of B.F. Skinner's Beyond Freedom and Dignity at an airport bookshop.
Mm-hmm.
And he read it, on the plane, and it so offended him that he went out and looked for something and made A Clockwork Orange for that reason. But the point is, modern psychology has been taken over by the rat psychologists because you can get numbers. And it's now being taken over by MRI people because they can show the brain working. And there's a very dangerous kind of materialism involved in that. The idea that you can explain consciousness just as a series of chemical reactions. And, well, the point is, it may be justified, it may not be, but without proof, you don't simply assume that. And that's one of the things that's happening, is that the notion of consciousness as somehow separate or transcendent is vanishing, and it's simply becoming just a kind of a mundane reflex, like touching the electrode to that frog you're dissecting's nerve, so that the leg kicks.
Right. Personally, I'm very fond of the idea of the Atman, the great self of the universe, that, when these bodies come together as a fish or a man, then it is temporarily, an individual separate from the rest, and maybe even on an incarnation cycle for a long time, coming, like you said, as a drop from the ocean and then eventually returning to it, but yet never losing anything worth keeping. Never, everything's just continually changing, and we're all it. And that's what works for me. I don't know.
Well,
I bet that's not a commonly accepted definition.
Well, be careful about veering into everything is everything, because there are gradations of things.
I don't know. I think
there are better things and there are worse things. And there is an ecology to the other worlds, just as there is an ecology to our world.
Right.
There's dark things and there's light things.
Yeah, there's ways you can be rude that you don't know that you could be rude. There's neighborhoods you don't necessarily want to wander into, being loud, even in this world.
Well, also there are also flows from other places which we don't fully understand, nor is it necessary to. But I'm convinced that there's a lot of people, a minority, but a number of people that this is the first time that consciousness has been to this planet, and it comes from a different kind of place. And I don't know how that works. I never took any Urantia, so I can't tell you. But the point is that whatever we believe is not really this is a very practical school in that sense. It's like you can.
That's why I say I'm fond of the idea. I'm not really into the word believe, but I'm fond of the idea. It's the one that is least depressing.
Well, the point is this: as long as we are stuck in the idea of time and space, we're kind of stuck.
Right.
At a certain level, everything has already happened. It's all kind of known. And for us to be here, we sort of have to pretend that we've forgotten that. And then it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's kind of like watching a football game from, a great football game from 2012 that's on ESPN Classic that you never heard of or saw. You don't remember and you don't know. So it's exciting because you don't know how it's going to turn out. Right. But if you happen to know exactly how it turns out, then it's probably not that interesting. Well, the point is, at this level of consciousness, we are aware of the things we're aware of, which is, when you think about it, totally immensely greater than the world that even our grandparents lived in. You go back 150 years, and no human on the planet ever traveled 60 miles an hour, unless they were, they hit a rock at the bottom. I was noticing we were flying this summer, and I happened to notice, and we were doing Mach point 0.85 Mach, and I was going, okay, almost, 85% the speed of sound, and we're 8 miles up in the air, and you can see the curvature of the Earth, and if you go back 150 years, nobody they would have thought you're insane, because there's no way you could know that. No way, that's impossible. Plus, every day I can get up and I look at that and see literally what's going on with all the cloud systems in my hemisphere, and see their movement for the last 12 hours. That absolutely, remember Eisenhower, had to bet. They had no idea whether or not the storms were going to roll in and destroy their D-Day invasion or not. They had a bet on the weather. Nobody knew anything about the weather, and now we take it for granted that, we have those satellites up there, and everything that you hear about the weather, by the way, comes directly from the National Weather Service. They just, then they hire people to do fancy weather maps and stuff, but everybody gets the same free feed, and it's changed our lives. You're going to go on vacation. You're going to say you wanted to. You're in LA, and you're going to go to Colorado. You're going to look and see what the weather is going to be, so you don't get caught in a blizzard in the mountains.
Right.
Oh, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, no, just 50 years ago, that was kind of right on the edge of unthinkable. We were just getting satellites up in the mid 60s. Internet, television. I remember when computers first showed up, because I showed up with televisions, and the idea that I could actually get inside the television and move something around was amazing. Just or what we do now, a podcast.
Right.
Nobody had only a few radio stations could do this, and you had to be licensed by the FCC.
Didn't Andrew have a public access show?
A2. He did a radio show out of Santa Barbara or Ventura.
I wonder if we can get a hold of those recordings.
Well, it depends on, I'm sure you can. It just depends on whatever happened to all the temple stuff. I don't know. You know what I mean? Because art, taped Andrew every time, every show. Every class for several years was taped. And we had the tape, and Tony had a bunch of tapes, which are at UCal Santa Barbara in the Tony Leitner collection. And I know there was just a huge library of tapes, and I remember sitting at the time noticing that basically what the Rajneeshis had built this whole publishing empire simply by transcribing his talks. And they had 38 books. And it was just, his talks, and they transcribed them, kind of plop them together, and another book. Boom,
was that the city up in Oregon?
Oh,
Rajneesh something?
Osho, yes. It became Osho. At the time it was Rajneesh. We had many sannyasin. There was a fairly active sannyas community in Los Angeles, and many of them used to come to the temple. Well, because Osho was a very syncretist. He took stuff from lots of different traditions. Hold on just a second. There you go. And I remember when everybody left to come up to Big Muddy, to the big Rajneesh city, or whatever it was called.
Rajneeshboro, I believe.
Yes. And then the whole mess that happened. And then now in the aftermath, it's occasionally mentioned on the news up here, but the story that they tell, and the story that I know from, turns out many of those people, I ran into the refugees from all of that, many of them and relocated in Santa Fe. And I met them in the early 90s and got them to talk about their experiences. And, well, Quite different stories.
Yeah, I recommend that there's a 99% Invisible. It's another podcast, has an episode called Rajneeshboro or Rajneeshville or whatever it is. You can find it on there. They go into it quite a bit, and there's a lot of recordings, and they go into all the specifics. But it kind of blew my mind.
Rancho Rajneesh.
Oh, yeah? That was one of them, I guess. There's another. There were two cities. They had taken over. There was one they had built, and they were trying to take over the one next to it.
I've actually been there.
Poisoned 900 people, and then Osho said that he had taken a vow of silence and he didn't know anything about it, and then they kicked him out of the country. And then for some reason he's quoted right alongside everyone else, and I'm like, wow, okay, that's weird. And he seems to contradict everyone else too. So I always kind of raise an eyebrow when I see his quotes.
Yeah. Well, basically,
to be honest,
I've always considered it's a profound failure of governance. And I mean, one of the things, and I remember the Castellani letters, which got into that, which has to do with, okay, you've become enlightened. Hooray for you. Right. Now, how are you going to come back down to the valley and deal with the fact that people still have to have plumbing? People still have to have food. We have to have running water. We have to have police. We have to have firemen. All of these things which human society needs. Oh, great enlightened one. How do we plug back in?
Right.
Well, what happens is they have this great problem of governance. They are building literally a city. I've been there. I was there before it was transferred to the Christian youth camp thing, when it was just kind of abandoned. Basically, it looked like a very nice junior college out in the middle of nowhere. And I've heard lots. One of the book projects I wanted to do for a long time is go and get there. I know a lot of people who know some things about it, and I'd like to pull that together and write a much more accurate story of what happened. Because from the moment that they got there were shots being fired across that fence. And it basically it snowballed, and Ma Anand Sheila was nuts. I mean, she tried to, classic case of somebody, power corrupting, absolutely, because she was given total power. Rajneesh didn't want to handle it. Evidently, he had serious back pain and troubles, and was on all kinds of painkillers, and gave all the power over to her, and she went crazy behind it, which is not the first time in human history this has happened. It's just we forget. Even though we're all cool and all of that, we still have to have the mechanics of civilization, the mechanics of society. And I think it's a great failure of governance. The message was fine. The governance was dreadful, and it ended up becoming this horrible, horrible mess. But I still have no problem with the teachings as a way of getting out. They say nothing about, that's what I've taken from it ever since, is we have to also ask ourselves the question, how do I apply my enlightenment? Because if you notice in the seeker community, people tend to withdraw, and they withdraw from things so that they can, so they can find their peace, find their own separate way, find their mountain. But then we have to bring this back. We have to bring it back down from the valley so that, that stuff doesn't happen. Because if it, the same thing happened at Rajneesh Puram or Rancho Rajneesh in some ways that happened in Rwanda. The same mechanisms took over, even though the death counts and all the rest of that were different. And so we've got to ask ourselves, with all our enlightenment, how do we stop this from happening? Rather than, we should be able to stop it in Rwanda, not have it at a religious commune. At that point you say, what good did it do them? I come from this is a very practical school, and we always ask ourselves, is there, Andrew used to say this, he could give you the meditation, and if you went and worked for 7 to 12 years on it, you could levitate. But then he'd say, but it's only $98 to fly to San Francisco round trip. So what's the point? You can float 6 inches off the ground. Oh boy.
Well, it seems to me, and I don't know, the whole structure of having, whether it be a city or a study group where it's a closed group, it has. I mean, there's certain benefits that come from that. But I think that maybe moving forward, and maybe with the opening of the what Teilhard de Chardin termed the Noosphere, or the collective knowledge, the opening of collective knowledge to the world, for example, through podcasts and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the path of the solo practitioner is the one that resonates more with the age of mankind or the age of Aquarius. Where, in other words, people are learning from different sources, but not necessarily drinking the Kool-Aid. And so,
Well,
with that,
I understand this idea that we can all be freelancers and we can just we pick here and pick there. And I mean, if I had a quarter for
or
every time
specialize it,
I've heard
right?
somebody say, "Oh, well, I'm my own teacher. I do this."
Or I have many teachers, perhaps,
How
rather
about
than
this?
I'm
When
I'm
you
a
come
servant of
to a
my master,
certain
Guru
moment
so and so.
when there are certain kinds of practices that can only be given to you by someone who knows how to do them, that you need a coach, in the same way that it's really useful to have a gymnastics coach and not try to do gymnastics all on your own,
Mm-hmm.
in case you manage to break your spine. Um, these schools do exist, and they have their value because of the fact that um, they are you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There many the schools that work, and there are as many paths as there are practitioners, but schools that work give you the opportunity to truly do some real change and some real work, rather than getting caught in church politics or arguments about practice, or then everybody's upset with each other and you have a schism. This is normal in these endeavors.
I'm just
But
wondering how deep can we get into Andrew's teachings on a podcast? I mean,
okay.
how deep are you willing to go? Because I think most of what we've talked about so far we covered in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking about wanting to go a layer
Well, I
deeper
can
with each
let me
episode. Hmm.
let's start with Andrew would always give this to start with, the first meditation. Um, when you eat, recognize that a life has been taken for yours to continue. It doesn't matter what order the life is. In other words, if you don't eat
Plant or
anything with a
animal.
face, or
Right.
or it doesn't have a face, it's still a life has been sacrificed on your behalf.
Yeah.
And we just want one thing, which is, before you eat, just say, just be grateful that a life has been given so that mine can continue, and maybe mine could, hopefully mine will be worthy of that sacrifice. And then you say, and if you can, this is a good thing to start. If you can, try to chew each bite 20 times.
Hmm.
Okay, that's the first little technique. Now there's one other one, which is when you're in the shower or when you take a bath. Understand that you're 86% water. You and the water are the same. Sister water. Give me your strength, your purity. Water is never mingled. You can mix it with anything and it's still water. And your constancy. One drop of water applied eventually can erode an entire mountain to the ground. And as you do your shower, do that. Just be sister water. I am you. Me, and just those two things. When grateful for your eating, and be
Yeah.
aware of the water, and and try to chew your food 20 times. But I will explain that in future, what that does. But there's certainly
Well,
nothing
it
wrong.
certainly increases the surface area of the food, makes it easier to digest, if nothing else.
Well, there's a reason for this, but
Mhm.
um, just try to. They're just those two little things, and I guess we can start. Well, I can start with the easy stuff for sure, and
Yeah,
it's like
thank you.
this. Let us start with zero. We have a body, we have a set of emotions, we have a mind. Now, what we need to understand is how it is that our world is put together. And we begin with, we live on a stage. The world that we perceive, and this is the thing that modern psychology tends to fall into with the materialism, the chemicals, and I can see the brain functioning.
Hmm.
We What we see is a very simplified simulation of the actual reality that we are experiencing. We cannot see cosmic rays. Sometimes you can see them when you're going to sleep at night. All they are is stripped off hydrogen nuclei traveling at almost the speed of light. And when they hit one of the neurons in your brain, there's a little explosion, and you'll see like a little white flash of light.
Hmm.
We all do. Um, Cosmic rays are bombarding us constantly. We're not aware of them. We know about ultraviolet. We know about infrared, and yet we cannot perceive them directly. There's music floating through the room right now, and if we have an instrument called a radio, we can hear it. There's pictures floating through the room right now, and there's a whole huge chunk of reality that's like that, and we need to understand that we create our reality with we have five sampling devices that take five different samples from the electromagnetic spectrum. We get light, which is we get from our eyes. We sample sound, which is at such a totally different level of speed than light. The frequency of light is up in the millions, and then the frequency of sound we can hear from 20 to 20,000 hertz or vibrations per second.
I think it's about 44 octaves or 46 octaves or
Well,
less or something like that. Yeah.
20 to 20,000 K is the generally accepted stereo um, area of human sound. We can
Right.
hear a little above, a little below, but we can't hear those dog whistles.
Every octave doubles it, so it ends up being about 46 to get up to light from, for example, red light up to middle C.
Yeah, well, guess what? We miss everything, almost all of that.
Yeah.
And
It's not practically useful for us,
okay,
so
well,
it's to survive. Yeah.
it's not a question of that. It's simply that we've developed the best capacity that we can, but we need to understand where our limitations are, where our blindnesses are, to understand why it's important for us to get out, behind the stage, behind the curtain, and see what's on the other side. Well, we have, we have the five sampling devices. Then we have smell and taste, which are related but not the same, which is chemical sampling, which is at a lower vibration still. And then we finally have touch, which we can touch things if they're not too hot, not too cold, or moving too slow or too fast. And with those five, this is what's interesting. The way that we knit our world together is through cause and effect. And that's the big job that if you've ever seen a baby, figuring out the world, the early thing that they're doing is cause and effect, cause and effect. I see my hand and I see the spoon, and how do I make my hand grab the spoon? And
Right.
it's a feedback mechanism. But for instance, these are each discrete. One of my favorite memories of I was sitting in biology class, interestingly enough, in Kansas, and far away out on the football field, the cheerleaders were practicing. And the biology we were doing at the time was pretty boring. So I'm staring out the window, and I noticed that they would have their arms straight out, and then they would bring them in and clap twice, and then stick their arms straight out twice for the cheer that they were doing, except the distance between where they were and where I was sitting was such that the delay was exactly perfect. When they put their hands out, you'd hear the clap. And then when they clapped, you wouldn't hear anything. Because of the differential between speed of light and speed of sound.
Right.
Well, the point was that what I see and what I hear are discrete. The only place that we've connected them is in our head. Same thing as if I'm holding a little cube about, half an inch by half an inch by half an inch, and it's white. Well, just looking at it without using any other senses, you don't know if that's a cube of marble, if it's a sugar cube, if it's maybe a cube of salt, a cube of chalk. You don't know what it is. Because you have to, feel it, maybe taste it, maybe, if you taste it, it's sugar, no problem. Or it's marble, for that matter. We've done the same thing, and we have knitted our world together. I was talking to my wife about this. I said, if I ever taught a metaphysical class, I would always wonder why people who are in the movies don't get it much quicker than everybody else, because film is a soundtrack and a picture track. And by manipulating the soundtrack, you can make the pictures seem to do different things than they do.
And I think it's because everybody's all stressed out, and the agent's always breathing down your neck, and even the makeup person's grouchy. It's like they're in a game within a game, like that Insurrection, a dream within a dream within a dream.
No, I'm just talking about the film. Any film itself is pictures and sound.
Right.
Now, I can sit there and I take a swing at you. You're actually a foot away, but since the camera is collapsing the depth of field, and you react, that's called acting, then the Foley person on the soundtrack puts the sound of somebody punching a slab of beef in, and we put the sound and the image together, and it's, look at him punch that guy. It's all fake. We know that. But we have put our world together the same way. Only it's not just the sound and the picture, but also the smell and the touch and the taste.
Right.
And we've used these to create a world. And sometimes this world gives us false positives. I remember this happening. It's happened a couple of times. I walked into a room. I knew that the light bulb had burned out, but I knew it intellectually, but my body didn't know it. So I walked in and I flipped the switch, and a dog barked twice. So I immediately tried to do it again, because instantaneously the mind had taken the cause, me flipping the switch, and the effect, the dog barking, and linked them.
Right.
Because that's how we construct our world. And now the mind, which is this very nice computer, it doesn't care what it's counting. It could be counting dead babies, or it could be counting candy canes. It doesn't matter. It doesn't put quality to things. It's cold, like mathematics. The computer determines, using this sensory input, what things are real, and it uses four pre-existing filters, which is time, space, cause, and effect. Does it exist? Does it have a duration? Does it exist in time? Does it occupy space? Is there a cause for it? And does it produce an effect? And if it doesn't fit these filters, the mind says, well, that's nice. It's abstract. There's a unicorn. A unicorn fulfills some, but not all of those conditions. And so we use the four filters and the five senses to construct this world that we perceive. And it is very difficult for us to constantly remember, this world that I see is not the world. It's a kind of a simulation of the world. For instance, we know, there's no question, when we look at the world, the image we see is upside down. The brain turns it back upside down again, so it's right side up. But the image that goes on the back of our retina is upside down. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
We have constructed this world. I always used to call this the possibility of magic, which is we have accepted, especially in the modern sort of scientific atheist community, mindlessly, without thinking about it, we've accepted that this pentasensorial illusion is reality, and it's the only reality, even though we know intellectually it's not. You see what I'm saying? It could not be.
Yeah, I think with multidimensional theory and things like that, people are starting to open up to other possibilities, or the mind is starting to at least grasp at, that idea.
It's a difference between understanding it, thinking it intellectually, and actually being aware of it in terms of functioning.
Right.
It's one thing that you can, as I said, I intellectually knew in my head that the light in that room had burned out. But when I walked in and flipped on the switch, and instead of the cause and effect that I expected, which is I flip the switch, light goes on, I flip the switch and the dog barks. Immediately my mind says, oh my God, I've got to check that.
So through words, we can only communicate so much. So if I say...
Well, please, let's not get into Wittgenstein.
Yeah,
I took philosophy in college, and the philosophy of language. And it's like we do the best we can. To speak is to lie, and after that, we're doing the best we can.
Yeah.
No, we need to understand, first and foremost, that we have constructed this world, and that while this world is very useful simulation.
If I can interrupt just for a minute.
Yeah.
So implied in all this is that Andrew had been to the other places and seen the other things beyond the constructed world, and he could help the student to do the same.
Yeah.
So, okay. So are there steps? I mean, we've got the...
Well, this is the first step. The first step is we understand I have a body, I have a set of emotions, and I have a mind.
Okay.
And now I have used the body and the mind to create this stage that I'm acting out my life on.
Right.
And that's fine. But instead of thinking nothing that I don't perceive is real, understand there's a whole lot I don't perceive that is real. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do through experimentation and through experience is to get on the other side of that veil and look at some of those important, for instance, what happens when I die? That's the single most important question that we have religious experience in order to answer.
Right.
If we can go and see where that is and understand it, then suddenly death is not a problem anymore. Until we do, it is the great moral terror of our lives and the universe. A lot of people have passed in my life lately, and I'm at peace with the process and everything that's happened, but having to deal with the reactions of all the people who are not at peace with it has been very stressful. So,
right. But it helps to remember that even the ones who lament and cry will one day be forgotten as well. I find.
Well, but their pain is real. The point is, but if the pain
it's real in the moment. Yeah.
But if the pain is caused by ignorance that could be alleviated, and therefore the pain dissolved, right, then it strikes me as a decent thing, a kind thing to alleviate that pain. Because most of the pain that people feel about the passing of loved ones is because they have absolutely no idea what's going on. And in point of fact, that pain isn't helpful to the loved one either. They feel it very intensely. You see what I'm saying? Somebody dies and you sit there and you're, it's all this. And that person, if there's, if that consciousness, and let's just pretend this is science fiction, because until you've proved it, it's not real. But suppose that consciousness is still around. They receive that emotion, only it's not filtered by a body anymore. And it's like being being in a fire hose, only it's shooting acid.
Right.
Well, you don't want to do that to somebody you care about, but if you don't know, you very easily can.
Yeah.
I mean, the trick is, as we know more about the world, we deal with the world in a far less we have less of a karma footprint.
Yeah.
We, Andrew used to say, we'll get to that some other point. Karma is not one of the mm, it's not important at this point. What's important is just to understand this is who we are, and this is how we've constructed our world. And I think that that's probably enough for the first shot.
Okay.
We
Do you want to? Oh, I'm sorry. What were you saying?
um
I mean, I'm gonna have to wrap
no,
it
I
up
think
pretty soon.
I think the second one we can do sort of the first meditation, because
Okay,
it's
that sounds good. Yeah, I look forward to that.
for the first shot, I mean, this is who we are, and this is how we've constructed our world. And now that we understand that, and we can kind of take a moment to sort of let that sink in, because it really is, we all fall back into believing that what I'm seeing is just this and that's all there is. We need to understand that's ridiculous. We see remember just the space between middle C and light, how much we miss.
Right.
Well, think how much more space there is that we're also missing. And some of that is um, the old saying, somewhere they're having a meeting about your fate to decide your fate, and you weren't invited. Well, some of the most important things having to do with your life are happening in places that right now you don't see. So it would be a good thing to see them.
That 12th house.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, I've been just going through all kinds of 12th house issues lately because all my big planets have just moved through it.
Oh man. Well, and we're in Pisces now, so it's appropriate.
Well, that's true, but I've always, two of my best friends were Pisces, so this is always kind of I remember.
My dad, my sister, and my ex-cult leader were all Pisces.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Speaking of which, tomorrow's my dad's birthday, or in 2 days. It's hard to tell because he was born in Shanghai, so there's the international date line and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those. It's useful for genealogies, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter because you're not going to send a cake either way.
Thank you for joining us on the Esoteric podcast. I'm sincerely grateful that you're sharing Andrew's teachings with us because, I got what I got from my dad when I was young. And so I appreciate that you're willing to come on here and share this with us. And I look forward to our next conversation.
All right. Well, thank you, Edward. It's good to speak with you.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.
Namaste.
Namaste. Bye-bye. Thank you, Hart Williams, for joining us on the Esoteric podcast tonight. Thank you also to the monks on Mount Koyasan, who are singing in the background right now. Thank you to Trinitas for the background to the title of the new segment, Cool-Assed Jesuits I Have Known. Also, thank you to John Michael Talbot for the track We Are One Body. Thank you also to Jonathan Goldman for the track Holy Harmony. By the way, Teilhard de Chardin also coined the term cyber. Apparently he was in China at around the same time as my grandpa. By the way, the image attached to this episode is the face of Teilhard de Chardin, and in the background is some of the artwork of André de Passano. To my new fan in Virginia, in response to the meme you reposted, we're not descended from monkeys. We share a common ancestor with them. If your science teacher really couldn't answer that, well, he should be fired. Glad to have you as a listener of the podcast. Do share it with your friends. Thank you all for tuning in.